So as you grow up, I'm going to go back to your writing here. As I grew older, I got better and better at avoiding him. His hounding of me did not decrease, but I rarely let him get his hands on me. I was incapable of just telling him to get away from me if he got me cornered. I'm not sure how to explain what this is like, this constant pursuit and hounding that you are unable to avoid when you are a child. When I was 12 years old, we moved. It was over. 7 years of stress and fear and pain finally replaced with an empty discomfort. A weight was lifted from my shoulders. I got a horse and felt more freedom than I ever had. And then he followed. He bought a piece of property just up the hill from us, and that was the beginning of dealing with him as a teenager. I never let him touch me again. I tolerated his crude comments and ate dinner next to him at the dinner table. I laughed at his jokes, and I dutifully rode my horse up the hill to check on him every couple of days at the insistence of my parents. He would always come out of his trailer and lay a hand on my thigh, invite me to tie up and come inside. I still couldn't look him in the eye, still couldn't tell him to fuck off. Instead, I would just change the subject and ride off with a hollow pit in my stomach. So you move away and then he follows you there. And you know, you talk about how hard it is to explain this hounding that you got, and you're trapped. You don't feel like you can say anything to your family. You can't get away from him, and this has just got to be. I mean, you say a hollow pit in your stomach, and this has just got to be eating at you.
Yeah.
And you find finally some comfort in horses, which was already your dream, and now you finally get your first horse.
Yeah, that was the best thing that ever happened to me up until that point, at least. Maybe ever. There was a neighbor lady that lived close to us who had this horse that she didn't have time for, and she let me bring it home and start riding it. And my family never had horses. We knew nothing about horses other than my just insane desire to have one. And so I just started riding it. And this horse was half broke at best, and I would fall off constantly. I just would smack my head on the ice and get back on and fall off again. And I remember my dad one time standing there and just telling me, you got to stop. You can't, I'm not going to let you sit here and kill yourself trying to ride this horse. And, you know, of course, back then I didn't have a silly thing like a riding helmet or even a saddle. I just had this desire to ride this horse, and if it was gonna kill me, it was gonna happen. And so I did. I just kept after it and finally wore the poor horse down, and he gave up, and he ended up being, you know, by my side for many years. And so that gave me this whole different level of freedom. I wasn't, you know, constrained to my feet anymore. I could go out and get just miles and miles away from it all. And, you know, home wasn't a comforting spot for me to be. So I was much more comfortable being out in the mountains by myself with my horse. And some people might have an issue with this, but by the time I was 12, I was carrying a 30 rifle in a scabbard on my saddle. And I had a little Ruger 22 that I carried with me, one or the other, usually when I was out riding, because my parents felt like I was safer with a gun than without a gun, even though I was 12 years old. I'd grown up around guns and was comfortable with them. And since I would head out in the mountains, and I think the only rule I had was that I had to be back by dark. And, when you're on a horse and you leave first thing in the morning, you can cover a lot of ground. And if something had ever happened to me, I don't know how anyone would have even found me. So I had to be responsible and self-reliant to make sure that I was as safe as I could be out there. And I give my parents a ton of credit for allowing me that freedom. They had a daughter who had this passion to be doing what I was doing, and it was dangerous, and they let me do it. And that is a large part of what built me into who I am today. And so that, that's something that I also try to do for my own kids as much as I can. I'm pretty cautious with them, but I still try to always allow them a lot of freedom. I remember one time I think I was 15. I was riding away from home a little ways, and I was down in this creek bottom, and I heard this commotion down there, this like barking and noise, and I thought there were neighborhood dogs who would chase deer, and I thought that the dogs had a deer down in the creek bottom, and that was what went through my head. And I ran my horse down through the brush into this creek bottom, thinking I was going to scare the dogs off this deer. And I came out of the brush, literally from me to you, like 5 feet away from this mountain lion that was just in full snarling, crouched attack mode, and it was squared off with. I didn't know this when I was riding, but one of my dogs had followed me, and I hadn't seen it. And it was down in this creek bottom with this mountain lion, and they were face to face, just snarling and crouched down at each other. And I came out of the bushes right on top of them, and I didn't feel any fear at all. I just reacted, and I just knew I had to get a little space between myself and the lion, and I spun my horse around and got up the hill just a little ways and then stopped to watch the situation. And the dog was this big wolf chow cross. It was a big dog, but she got scared and she cut and ran. She decided she'd had enough, and she turned to run from this cat. And the second she turned to run, the cat had her. It just threw an arm over her back, reached under, bit her throat, and she just went limp. And then the cat just picked her up and carried her away.
Yeah, and that's because you're not supposed to turn your back on the.
Don't ever.
So even when you kind of rode away, I was kind of like, oh.
And the reason I did that is because the cat was
engaged,
distracted.
Right.
I wasn't the threat to the cat. I was the side thing. The threat was this dog. And thank goodness my horse was just a rock and didn't dump me right in front of this cat, because had that happened, there's no doubt in my mind that I would have been attacked. But, things like that, that was my life. Things like that happened, and I was young, and I had to be able to deal with those situations.
How old were you at that point?
15.
And there's also this really, really strong dichotomy here, is that you're out in the wilderness on horseback, packing heat, confronting mountain lions. And even with all that, you didn't confront this abuser. And that's another, sign and indication to people of how hard it is psychologically for someone that's as strong as you were as a teenager, that's out there on your own. And like I said, riding around the mountains with a pistol and a rifle, ready to, get after it. And yet by this point, kind of an old man still has this level of control over you in your own home.
Yeah.
That's just